Everybody. See, we have a quorum, and the hour to convene has arrived 5 minutes ago. I think we'll get going. So I'm going to call this meeting of the full Ways and Means Committee to order. And we do indeed have a quorum, and we're going to have first readers. Chairman Royal, are you with us?
Yes.
Tell us about House Bill 436, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me say this. 436, there is a committee substitute coming. We're just trying to go ahead and get it assigned to a subcommittee to be worked on. But it deals with community health centers, which are local nonprofit community-owned health care providers serving low-income and medically underserved communities. This bill simply will exempt these community health centers from state sales tax of goods purchased for the centers. It will also allow important providers to have more resources to serve the underinsured in this case, and the substitute coming will also have a 2-year sunset on it.
Thank you, Chairman Royal. Any questions for the author of this legislation from any members of the committee? I would warn you he might have some for you on yours, so turnabout's fair play. Okay.
Thank you for your help, Mr. Chairman.
I was just trying to pay you back for this morning. House Bill 436 will assign to our Sales Tax Subcommittee. And while you're up there, if you would, Mr. Secretary, read House Bill 445, and then we'll ask Chairman Royal to present that.
To amend Code Section 48-5-7.4 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to the current use assessment for bona fide conservation use property, residential transitional property, application procedures, penalties for breach of covenant, classification on Tax Digest annual report, so as to change certain provisions relating to buffers adjacent to the rivers or perennial streams, to provide for current use assessment for certain undeveloped land areas within buffer zones established by law or local ordinance adjacent to rivers, perennial streams or reservoirs, to provide for exemptions for certain covenant and penalty provisions, to provide for lost current use assessment in certain circumstances, to provide for a contingent effective date, to provide for applicability, to provide for contingent repeal, to repeal conflicting laws, and for other purposes.
Chairman Royal.
Mr. Chairman, this piece of legislation as it's currently written has unintended consequences, and I would respectfully ask that we postpone any further action on it right now.
We will certainly grant that wish.
Thank you, sir.
And remove it. Mr. Secretary, House Bill 446.
To amend Code Section 48-8-45 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to sales and use tax, reporting of sales and deductibility of bad debts, so as to change provisions relating to deductions of bad debts by persons reporting on an accrual basis, to provide for claims to be filed by certain affiliated groups, to provide for related matters, to repeal conflicting laws, and for other purposes.
Chairman Royal, tell us about House Bill 446.
Okay, we have a committee substitute, and I think there will probably be another committee substitute, but we need to get this one in a committee to perfect the language. But it deals with credit card banks who issue private credit cards like Home Depot credit cards. In 1998, the law was amended so that it allows the credit card bank to deduct the interest on bad collections. And this simply will allow affiliated groups within that bank company to have those deductions assigned to them also within the same bank.
That's always confusing for a lot of consumers. I'm glad you're handling some legislation that might give a more transparent view of that. Any questions for the author on that? Chairman Mills.
Representative Roy, so bad credit that they couldn't collect on, they
Just
would be
the sales tax portion of the bad credit.
Okay.
Excuse me. And that's already deductible now. But this bill attempts to allow some of the other affiliated companies within that same bank, if they don't have enough income for the offset the credits, that they can apply it to one of the affiliated groups.
Thank you, Chairman Royal. We'll assign that to our Sales Tax Subcommittee.
Thank you, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the committee's first readers for today, and I want to pause for just a second. and have the pleasure of introducing to everyone on the committee and also in our audience here today and maybe at home on the internet, our newest member, Representative Stacey Abrams. If you raise your hand or wave at everybody, I can't tell you how delighted I am to have Representative Abrams on this committee. She brings with her a wealth of institutional knowledge, a tax law degree and a law degree from Yale University, and 100 other things. I could go on, and I just can't tell you how excited I am about having her wisdom afforded to this committee, and look forward to working with you for many years to come, Representative Abrams. And welcome to Ways and Means officially. Okay, our second readers, Chairman Royal, do you have a report to the committee on House Bill 321 or one of the other? Is the other ad valorem, since you're going to present? Do we have? Who's your co-chair there? Chairman Sims not here. I guess you're going to have to report your own bill out and then do it. You said 321. Yes, sir. 321. Chair recognizes Chairman Richard Royal to present House Bill 321 to the full committee. You can either remain at your seat if you want, and I'll turn on your mic, or you can go to the podium. Which would you prefer? I'll go to the podium. Okay. Welcome, Representative Mosby. We're glad to have you with us today. Thank you. Fine. It's a beautiful day. Wish we were outside. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. We discussed 321 the other day, but we didn't have a copy of the legislation in the file. This simply codifies in the statutes a court decision in Chatham County which says that a person in a conservation use covenant who owns a beneficial interest can have more than a 2,000-acre limitation according to the percentage owned proportional in that conservation use covenant. I have again checked with Legislative Counsel. There's nothing in this legislation that did not come out in the court case in Chatham County. We have talked with the people in Chatham County, and they do not intend to appeal the court decision.
Does that conclude your presentation?
I'll be glad to answer any questions. We pretty well hashed it over the other day.
Number one is that who? Does anybody like press the button? Number one, that's the inadvertent. Any questions for the chairman? Seeing none, what's the pleasure of the committee? I have a motion to pass and a second by Chairman Lewis. Any further discussion? House Bill 321. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. We shall report this to the Rules Committee this afternoon. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and thank you for allowing me to go first.
All right. What's next? Okay. What committee is that in? Chairman Royal, do you have a report to the full committee on House Bill 182? Chair recognizes Representative Chuck Martin, also a subcommittee chairman of this committee and chairman otherwise in the House, to present House Bill 182. Please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I come to the committee today ask for your favorable consideration of House Bill 182 by committee substitute LC 186232S is the document I'll be referring to today. If you will recall, this committee passed last year some language that clarified the code section in Georgia that deals with tax allocation districts known as TADs. These have become increasingly popular mechanisms for local governments to incentivize development and redevelopment in areas that otherwise would not be able to have that development, and it does so without a tax increase or a tax abatement. What we seek to do this year with House Bill 182 by substitute is to clarify what has evolved over time to be an unintended consequence or perhaps just a misunderstanding of how a tax digest is reported. When a tax allocation district comes into place, there's a base that the property has, and any increment, any building on that base, any improvement on that base, that the revenue that comes from that improvement goes to pay the bonds in the tax allocation district. And that is done by an agreement of the cities, the counties, and if a school board is involved, or when a school board is involved, that's done by agreement of all three of those entities. There exists a situation in Georgia now where that property is reported back to the tax digest. Local school boards are in a position where that increment is being counted into their digest for local funding formula to the state education. Again, this is money that they do not receive as yet, but it is being counted against them, if you will, the 5% local share match. What this legislation seeks to do today is to clarify that the increment should not be counted toward the local match, as the school boards don't get that revenue at this time. Very important thing to understand is this takes no money away from the current local match. The entire local match that's being paid on the base property when the TAD is created still gets paid, and when the bonds are paid off, the additional increment will go into the tax digest and will become part of the local match. But this legislation just simply seeks to make sure school boards aren't put in a disadvantageous position whereby they have to pay money in on tax revenues they do not receive. I'd be happy to answer any questions if the committee has them.
The gentleman's yielded for question. I just want to make it clear to the committee and members of the audience that, and we use a lot of acronyms, obviously, in the tax committee. A TAD stands for Tax Allocation District. An example of one, I guess, that people see every day on the interstate here is the Atlantic Station area here in Atlanta that was redeveloped with a special tax allocation district allowance. The basic principles behind a TAD is that you fix a base value of what's typically blighted property prior, and then you increase or amplify the value of that property by development, and the amount over the base amount, the taxation, the property ad valorem taxation that would have been attributable to that instantly actually can go back to the developer to help defer the cost, typically bonding costs for the development, and then the city or county in which the TAD is located winds up with a substantially grossed up piece of property and elimination of a blight and so forth. It's a great tool for urban redevelopment and frankly all sorts, even rural redevelopment for that matter. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about TADs. And it's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chairman Martin, that one of the unintended consequences that was passed into this legislation is it really just didn't contemplate the local share of school board, local share of taxes, and this fixes that problem that's come to light over some years now that these TADs have come into existence in almost every case very successfully.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. That there are learned attorneys on both sides of the issue that say that it shouldn't be currently counted in, and there are others that say it has to be. This legislation clears up that matter, and everybody is understanding of that situation now.
Okay. Any members of the committee have a question? We encourage questions. We encourage spirited debate. We respect all views on this committee. Are there any questions at all? Any comments from members of the committee? Is anybody down there awake? Just kidding. Just kidding. I was only referring to my own explanation of this. It is an ambient kind of thing. I do understand. If there are no questions of the author, what's the pleasure of the committee? A motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? House Bill 182. By committee substitute, we'll make sure before we vote we're all working off of LC 186232S. No further discussion. All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Matter is passed. We will put this to the Rules Committee hopefully this afternoon. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, would you allow me to acknowledge two young ladies from Milton High School that are down here with me today? If Anna and Brittany, the chair would recognize them. They're down from Milton High School doing a government class.
We'd be delighted to. Maybe if we could get them up front where they could wave to the folks back home, too. They might be doing that. I promise you they'd a whole lot rather look at you than me. So why don't y'all come up here and give a wave. Some of your teachers might be looking at you there, and I want to make sure they know you're telling the truth when you said you were here. We're delighted to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It's always inspirational to see young people involved in their own futures, and we thank you all, you two ladies, for being with us today. Okay. Public Finance Chairman Scott. Is Mr. Representative Chambers with us? Yes, indeed. I see her there. Do you have a report for the full committee on House Bill 30, please, sir? Where are you at? What number?
26.
There we go. Are you on? Push.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. The Public Finance and Policy Subcommittee of Ways and Means has reported House Bill 30 with a do-pass recommendation for the full committee of Ways and Means.
Chair recognizes the ever-present ebullient chairman of MARTOC, Representative Jill Chambers, to present her bill, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I appreciate your do-pass recommendation out of subcommittee. Bring before you House Bill 30. It's a private enterprise agreement for public housing authorities. In 1996, the General Assembly passed legislation recognizing housing authorities and enabled them to include privately owned mixed-income housing, but it never really clarified what type of agreements they can enter into, and that's what House Bill 30 seeks to do. There, if you look at the fiscal note on it, it basically explains how it expands the meaning of the private enterprise agreement to include participation in ownership of a housing project with a private partner through the use of authority-owned land, use of authority funds to cover a portion of construction costs, or to subsidize operating cost of units for low-income persons. This legislation is simply enabling legislation. It does not force or require any action. It does not set goals or minimums for low-income housing construction, and it does not require or describe any kind of project or negotiating parameters for agreement. And if you look at the bill itself, on line 17, you see the word may. The word may allows opt-out and property ownership, and it enables more projects for low-income persons to be built. And I do have some examples of some that were done under private enterprise agreements for the city of Atlanta, but this does have statewide application, and hopefully we'll be able to provide nice, high-quality housing for low-income folks. And I would appreciate your favorable consideration of House Bill 30.
The lady yield to questions.
I'd be happy to try to answer them if I can, sir.
Are there any questions for the presenter by members of the committee? I'd be particularly interested in knowing Representative Abrams' opinion of this legislation. If you would push your button.
Actually,
I know you've had a lot of experience in this area.
I know that the Atlanta Housing Authority is very eager to have this opportunity, particularly with the mayor's initiative to increase the number of affordable housing units. This would permit developers who specialize in affordable housing to partner with AHA and with other housing authorities throughout the state to provide a better tax base for actually putting those units into place. And so I'm certainly strongly in favor of it.
All right. Any other comments, questions for the author? Seeing none on this thing's working up here. Seeing none, what's the pleasure of the committee?
Move to pass.
Second.
A motion do pass, and I have a second by our Vice Chairman. Any further discussion? House Bill 30. Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Representative Chambers, it carries unanimously. We're happy to report this to the Rules Committee this afternoon. Thank you for that presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
Okay. Sales tax. Chairman Lewis, do you have a report to the full committee on House Bill 410, please, sir?
Yes, sir.
20, wait a minute. There we go. Sorry.
Your committee on sales tax met regarding House Bill 410, LC number 1814-9651S, and we recommend it to the full committee with a due pass by committee substitute.
Chair recognizes distinguished gentleman from the 148th, Representative Hanner, to present his bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. House Bill 410, through referendum, sets up a municipal option sales tax. Now, what this does is zeroed in on actually one city. It says on page 2, line 11, municipality means any city which has received correspondence from the State Department of Natural Resources urging the municipality to make distribution of pipe replacement its highest priority because of asbestos fiber health risk. This also can only be used for two things. That's asbestos repair of water facilities for asbestos and for natural gas facilities. What we're talking about, and also it says, it sets on page 3, the maximum period of time is 9 years or $1.8 million, whichever generated the fastest. That's what they think it will take to fix this problem. And we're talking about a town of around 1,700 people to low to moderate income. You're talking about 90% low, moderate, and aged. And you're talking about people that actually receive the minimum in Social Security. So raising the utility bills would be very tough on them. And this is a way for this small rural city to take care of their own problems. I'll be glad to try to answer any questions.
Thank you, Representative Hanna. It's my understanding that the overall cost is really a lot more than the 1.8, but that there are grants and other sort of what I might call skin in the game that the city of Richland has put up from other sources. This is the remainder of what's necessary to remediate this emergency situation.
Very much so. They have spent a lot of other money through their wastewater treatment system and that type of thing. The gas system was installed in 1958, and some of this water lines were installed back in the 20s.
And it's my further understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, sir, that they've been notified by Georgia Environmental Protection Division that an extremely dangerous situation does exist, and that they're under order to remediate whatever is necessary to take care of that.
Yes, sir, they have, and this is the only letter like this that has been sent out, so that's why it would only affect them.
And I also want to make it clear that I remember the committee and those in the audience is that if there's a such thing as legislative intent involved in this, and this has certainly surfaced in all the subcommittee hearings on this matter, it is not the intention of this committee or this General Assembly, I think, as this bill moves through, to create a precedent of municipal splost at all.
Yes,
these circumstances are dire. They're very unique, and that's the reason that this bill already is set to sunset by its own terms.
Yes,
and it would require extraordinary circumstances, probably even beyond these, for any further of this type of legislation to be favorably considered until we have made a policy decision on most anyway. And that's been an issue that's been around here for many years. So I want to try to give some comfort to those that are afraid that this is going to create a new precedent and that we're going to see these popping up for taxpayers all over the state. As a matter of fact, there was part of this was general maintenance that we forced in the committee to be taken out of the bill.
Yes, sir.
It had nothing to do with the emergency situation in our opinion, or at least we thought not. It may have, but we thought not. So that was removed. Are there any questions for the author of this legislation? What number? Chairman Scott.
Representative Hanna, I appreciate the chairman clarifying that for us. I guess my question would be, this tax, assuming it passed, the voters voted for it, would be assessed on all sales taxes, the phone bill, the water bill, anything that sales taxes collect on it in the community?
there is an exemption for automobiles in this.
That was going to get my second question. What did you feel like you could do for the businesses in that area that sold high-dollar items? Force them out, and that answers that question.
In small towns like that, you don't have that many businesses that sell high-price items.
Of course, the difference in automobiles that distinguishes them is that even if you go to another city or county to buy it, you're still going to be assessed with the tax in the city and county where you register the vehicle. That's kind of unique with automobiles. Chair recognizes. Are you finished, Chairman Scott? Okay, sorry. Chairman Williams, question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Howe, two points. I know we're helping Richland out because of the financial situation down there, but this would apply to any municipality throughout the state of Georgia, but only for those two items listed for the asbestos remediation and for natural gas. Is that
Yes, and only if they have received a letter from
EPD?
EPD or DNR stating that they're in an emergency situation.
Okay, thank you.
Further inquiry of the author. Chair seeing none, what's the pleasure of the committee? Have a motion, Chairman Martin, do pass committee substitute LC 18-622-9, second by Vice Chairman Sims. Is there any further discussion? Oh, I'm sorry. Let me state that again. For the purpose of the motion, LC 14-9651S. Chair misstated. Would everybody please look and make sure they're working off the same? Seeing no objection, the motion do pass. And the second, is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Motion passes. We shall report this to the Rules Committee. Thank you, Representative
Thank you,
Hammond.
Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee.
All right, where is that? It is, okay. Okay, I'm going to turn the chair over to Chairman Mills, if you would, please, sir, and ask for, who do we have from the, oh, can you share that too?
Mr. Chairman, your subcommittee on comprehensive tax reform has met, and we have a favorable recommendation on two bills, House Bill 353 and then also House Bill 354. And at this time, we'd like to ask if you would go ahead and present to the full committee LC 14-9650S, substitute to House Bill 354.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do bring before the committee today committee substitute House Bill 354. A quick summary of the bill in Section 1. It now requires the local school boards, municipalities, and counties to report their tax digest within 1 year to the State Department of Revenue, so the computations for the homestead exemption credits, which are paid for by you out of the state budget, so totaling some $400 and something million every year, can be allocated properly amongst the local governments. It's hard for me to believe, but I'm told by the Revenue Department there are some subdivisions of government in this state that even after a year fail to report the requisite data that's necessary for the state to make a determination of how much credit or actual just grant credit that they're going to send down to the various local governments. And what happens is when one local agency, I'll call it, whether it be a school board, a city, or a county, is delinquent in reporting it, it skews the whole system, because it's a very definitive grant that's appropriated by this General Assembly every year. It's not variable, so the allocations are very important, and it's not a grant that supplants other credits that taxpayers have. Very few people in Georgia really realize, very few property owners realize that their state government pays actually about the first $25,000 of value, ad valorem value of our home places as a grant. And this just simply says, a year is plenty of time, we think, to get that information up here where we can actually send your local governments the money. And of course they rely on it as well because it's part of their budgetary process. And the weakest link in any a chain's only as strong as this weakest link, and that's what we're trying to make all the links a little stronger here in Section 1. Section 2, similar kind of thing with tax executions. We just ask you to, since so many third parties rely on those, we just ask our tax commissioners to get those recorded within 30 days. That's a matter of commerciality in many counties. Section 3 redefines the homestead exemptions for people age 62 and over. It's a means-tested situation, but it now includes only family members that live in the home on the $10,000 limit. Section 4 just really asks that when there are new board appointments to the Board of Tax Assessors that they file with the Department of Revenue who they are, so we know who to deal with. There's obviously a partnership between the State Department of Revenue where it's required for the department to collect a lot of taxes for local folks, and it's just incumbent upon them to know who has the authority to bind the local areas, and we just need to know when they've replaced board members so we know we're talking to the right people. Section 5 deals with public utility companies and ad valorem taxes on that, and it adds a requirement to where they put where they add a physical address identification of the property that might be otherwise exempt from the digest. And I think in Section 6 and 7 have to do with the effective dates of the bill. Now, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to yield any questions or comments from the committee. Otherwise, I'd ask for your favorable consideration. This bill comes to us from the Department of Revenue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Any questions from members of the committee? Yes, sir. Let's see. Are you number 18? All right.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
will
ma'am.
the funds, so assuming there's a delinquent government, and there's a forfeiture of the exemption, will the funds be recoverable from the taxpayer, or will the government, basically my concern is, let's say your government fails to meet the responsibility of reporting, does that mean they will then reduce your exemption for that year? So will the taxpayers have a negative, there'll be a negative impact on the taxpayer?
The taxpayer actually has already gotten his exemption. The funds that they don't get if they're delinquent over a year would be the funds that would replenish that which have already been in the local government's budget. The taxpayer would only suffer if it happened into the second year, I think, because then it would fall out of the budget. We went through that in great detail in subcommittee, I think, and I'm certainly subject to correction to any of the members of the subcommittee that may have heard that debate. But that was very important to us that we didn't injure our taxpayers, because that's what this is all about. I mean, to make sure that a government doesn't injure its own constituents by their negligence is what this whole process is about. And frankly, we also, I think, inserted in the bill some notice requirements where DOR. No, we didn't in the bill. The DOR assures us that when they write the regs for this, that there's going to be a 30 or 60-day prior notice to the local governments if they're running up on what would be a delinquency. So, and that's going to be part of the operations of roads. And I thank the lady for the question.
Thank you, Representative Abram. Good question. Representative Williams, what number are you?
2.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, regarding the forfeiture of the grants, does that money revert back to the general treasury, or is it divvied out amongst the other systems? How's that? Where's that money go?
It would essentially revert back to the general treasury in the sense that it would have never left the general treasury. So that way, but I mean, there's no particular reversion in this code section. We hope this never happens. Frankly, right. It's just that obviously we've had to put the stick in front, or carrot in front of a stick here, and put something out there.
Now you put the whipping stick out there.
The history has been our Department of Revenue now. You know, I know a lot of people joke about them, and they're the revenuers, and they're the mean old bad people that collect taxes from us. But my experience with our department is what I see is a lot of very dedicated folks that go out in the field on their own, spend a lot of late nights and early mornings and dark days and snowy nights out in local governments helping them do it right for all the right reasons. And I hope that's not going to be, that we'll see this never have a forfeiture. But it's going to send a message that we expect you to act reasonably and responsibly towards your constituencies and local governments. That's all we're asking them to do is just act reasonably so we can give them some money.
Thank you. Representative Williams, follow up?
Answer my question.
Representative Tumlin, did you have a question?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, on page 5, lines 15 through 17, that was just the other descriptive language we added in the subcommittee, wasn't it? Where before it just had other language, and this way it said it should be either a map or parcel identification.
Actually, what we added was line, 15 through 17, where we said what other descriptive information includes.
Thank you.
Because when we first considered the bill, it didn't have that. We had no idea what they meant by other descriptive language. It could have been anything. So this tells what will satisfy that requirement.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right, yes, Representative Moe.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I know we talked about this in subcommittee, but the teeth in the bill, how do we address that in terms of if the local office doesn't submit, what's the recourse?
We withhold their grant.
Okay.
But that's only after they've had another whole round of notice and just begging them to comply. And we also, the Commissioner of Revenue also has the right to waive that withhold and send it if he finds cause that they've acted, and that there's some, reason beyond the control of the local government where they're unable to provide the data that they have to provide for these grants. But it just deals with compiling, how many other exemptions there might be out there. Like some cities have exemptions for everybody over 65. There's not a one size fits all anywhere in the state on the local issues, but we just want all those out first so we can see what our grant applies to. So it's not going to be an entitlement as much as it is a supplement to helping folks with their ad valorem property taxes on their homestead.
Representative Sims.
Is it not true, Mr. Chairman, that
I don't want that job.
I understand. Neither do I. The Revenue Department, I think you may have stated this, but I just want to make sure that are going down and helping these local governments get this thing ready. They had a little problem with the fact that they are going down and then they're looking at the homestead exemption when it comes back up after they've gone down to local government. Is that going to be addressed in the rule and regs that they follow on also? It wasn't that stated in the committee. I may have been confused when they were saying that they were going down and helping the local governments when they couldn't get this done. And now that I just want to know if that was going to be mentioned in rules and regs or not.
We've changed who's confused after your question. Now, I am listening to your question, but I think they're going to continue to go assist the local communities. Okay. They're going to do that on an ad hoc basis and an as-needed basis. They certainly go every time they're requested, and it's my understanding a lot of times they go just on an audit basis to help folks that they think might be in trouble, to anticipate these things. And for that, I'm grateful to them. It's just hard after giving somebody a whole year. I mean, what else in life do you have a year's grace period on? I mean, if you don't make your mortgage payment on your house, after about 60 days, somebody's going to own your house. We're giving these folks a year to do something to get us to give them something. So there's funding for what they're doing. They can't say it's not going to be funded. And then we're sending out a force at the taxpayers' expense to help these local governments. Some are not very sophisticated, albeit, and I understand that. But we're doing everything we can to help them. We're just asking them at some time to be responsible to their constituents and the taxpayers of this state. And I don't think that's at all unreasonable. If that answers the gentleman's question, I'm not sure it does.
It does.
All right, seeing no further questions, I believe that puts us in the posture of entertaining a motion at this time. All right, we have a motion and a second to pass by substitute, just to make certain, LC 14965 OS to House Bill 354. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, and the motion carries unanimously. And let me compliment the chairman on his diction and pronunciation. Great job.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you maintain the chair, please, sir? And we now have 353.
Be honored to. And the Comprehensive Tax Reform Subcommittee reports back to the full committee a due pass recommendation on the substitute to House Bill 353.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill, as you said, was favorably reported out of subcommittee after a great amount of debate in subcommittee. And this is what we call a compliance bill, and again, this comes to us from the Department of Revenue. And the goal in any compliance bill, obviously, is to make compliance less expensive and less cumbersome for taxpayers, and make the oversight less expensive and less cumbersome for the Revenue Department. Those if we can make those two ends meet, we've done a good day's work for the taxpayers of the state of Georgia. And the other thing I will tell you is that I have a very fervent and firm belief that if all the legitimately owed taxes of Georgia, as they're accrued, are paid in a timely manner by taxpayers, then and only then will we be able to, in an effective way, reduce the tax burden on all Georgians. Sometimes we look at these kind of compliance bills and we say, gosh, we don't want to give that kind of power to the Department of Revenue. But you know what? When we had to cut health care 3 years ago for needy Georgians, and we actually even had to cut our funding formulas for our public education in Georgia, which is near and dear to every heart, no matter what political party you're here from, because of the horrible recession we were going through. I just want to remind everybody now that things are kind of good, had we had the $1 billion of uncollected, legitimately owed taxes that were out there as receivables, we would not have to made a single cut during what was the single largest, deepest, most horrendous recession since the Great Depression in 1932. That $1 billion would have carried us through that whole period. So it's incumbent upon this committee, and I think us all as elected officials, that if a tax is legitimately owed, we need to give our Department of Revenue the tools, reasonable tools that they need to collect the taxes that are owed. That's the biggest part of what this bill is about, is enhancing some of those, making it less expensive on taxpayers for them to do it, and making it easier on taxpayers as well. Section 1 deals with adding to the Revenue Department heretofore has been forced by rule and reg and also by statute when they're serving subpoenas for whatever purposes that they've always had the right to subpoena people about or tax records about. They've always had to do that with personal service. That's very expensive and it's very delaying in time. This just adds the possibility of doing it by overnight mail return receipt requested. It does not require that the person being served acknowledge service, but if they choose not to acknowledge that more convenient service, then there can be a fee added. That's what Section 1 talks about for the cost of having to do it the hard way with personal service. And I would also add, too, that there are a lot of taxpayers out there that maybe owe taxes or maybe don't even know why they owe the taxes or maybe have some justifiable reason why something is in dispute, and then they get subpoenaed with a hard copy subpoena. Unfortunately, that's got to come to their work a lot of days or their home. And there are a lot of people, I guess, me being one, that I would like to avoid the embarrassment of my neighbors or my coworkers in my workplace seeing me subpoenaed by the Revenue Department. This just, in that sense, it's very taxpayer friendly that I can accept service at the post office where essentially it's my own private business that I'm dealing with, and I don't have to share that with the rest of the world. And I thank the department for bringing that provision to us. We added about 3 years ago a provision where taxpayers, can grant written authorization to the department to deal with their own tax matters and all the backup data and everything that they have. But unfortunately, when we did that, we left out one vital piece of it, where we've had in the law that they could never talk to a third party under any circumstances. This just says that they can if the taxpayer gives them written, under oath, sworn permission to do so. Again, it's just a far more efficient way of being able to handle resolution of in dispute tax matters. That's what's in Section 2. Section 3 is the same service things as we had with subpoenas in Section 1, but it has to do with garnishments. And it just adds those less expensive possibilities of serving garnishments on employers of delinquent taxpayers with overnight mail return receipt requested. There again, they have to accept it, and if they don't accept it, then there can be a fee attached to it. This one was especially concerning to the committee and debated long and hard because garnishees, people who are served with garnishments, are innocent folks. they're a vital part of the process of collection of taxes. They assist the state, but they haven't done anything wrong. They've just hired somebody that has become delinquent in their taxes, and we took great pains to make sure that we didn't add to that burden whatsoever. That if anything, we treated our employers out there as fairly and unencumberingly as we possibly could. Section 4 is also an economy of scale thing, and allows the department now to use the statewide filing system now to file attachments against property. Heretofore, wherever they located a piece of property, they'd have to go to that particular county and file over and over, county by county by county. We now have a statewide filing system, and they can use just one filing. It's certainly far more efficient, and it's far less expensive, and it's certainly reliable by all of Georgia. So you have to just check one place rather than every county that you think. Section 5 is what has been amended a couple or three times, and we have even though we're probably not going to take testimony, I may have to just look at my friends from the banking community over here, because this part of this bill has received, and justifiably so in my opinion, a significant amount of consternation by the committee and those folks that are consults of ours on the outside that help us perfect legislation. But essentially it has to do with a more efficient way of the department gathering information electronically, as opposed to, again, hard paper demand, which they've been doing before, with an electronic hookup to, in this case, we're going to start off, I think, with three of the huge banking organizations that do business in the state of Georgia. I won't name them as a pilot project, but essentially they, by their own agreement, totally voluntary on their part, have agreed to sort of hook up their systems with the DOR systems, with obviously all the privacy protections that are currently afforded in the circumstances. Now, we're talking about where the Department of Revenue requests from our financial institution, which they always have had the right to do. It's just a different way they do it. Account information on taxpayers that are not just delinquent in this case, but they're already liened. And the Department of Revenue will provide the Social Security number, will provide the address. In other words, there's not one bit of personal information that is expected to be given up by the financial institution other than the fact of the existence of an account and the balances in an account. And we also ask our banks, please, not to tell not please, but we have some pretty strong language in here as to why they are not allowed to tell the account owners that DORs come calling, because unfortunately what happens when that happens is money typically isn't there about 8 minutes later if that happens. And this has to do with seizure. And again, what we're talking about here, folks, is had we had that $1 billion and we had these easy ways and inexpensive ways of assessing the possibility of collecting what was already lien taxes, our jobs up here would not have been as near as painful in 03 and 04, and a lot of sleepless nights, and I see members of this committee spent, and I know you did, alongside with others, in dealing with some horrible decisions on not what muscle to cut, but what bone to cut into when things really got bad around here. Some of those decisions we wouldn't have had to make had we had these kind of things in order. And again, I'm very grateful to the department for suggesting all the possible ways that we can deal with that. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield to any questions, and certainly be glad to hear from any comments from anybody on the committee as we go forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, I'd like to recognize, I believe, Representative Tumlin. Is that you, number 23?
48.
Okay, I'm sorry, Representative Lewis.
Mr. Chairman, I wasn't in the subcommittee, but I think I get the bill. This only kicks in to a taxpayer who is delinquent or has already been liened on. That's the only time this really kicks in.
Actually, not even just delinquent, because delinquent may mean that there's still some resolution necessary of a bona fide dispute. This is after they've been liened, after they've been afforded due process, after the entire dispute process is over with. It's like after a court ruling. It's not that per se, but it's that far into the collection process.
So as long as I'm complying with the tax laws, I have nothing to worry about.
Absolutely nothing. And even if you're compliant and you have a bona fide dispute with the Revenue Department, you wouldn't have anything to worry about here either.
Thank you.
All right, seeing no further questions, I had one question for the chairman. I'm sorry, Representative Moses. What number? 8?
9.
9, all right.
I can move 8, though.
Gotcha.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
and I didn't get a chance to sit in on the subcommittee either. Authorized representative, just give me an example of that. Who would be the commissioner's authorized representative?
You potentially, commissioners authorized
Right.
representative? Probably any other employee of DOR.
Okay.
Taxpayers authorized representative would be who was ever on the power of attorney, like you might have gotten when you were in public accounting.
Right. On the financial institutions piece, there could be a possibility that we may push people into bankruptcy if we seize their financial assets at some point in time. Obviously, they're having some problems in this whole process, so we may be exacerbating the problem here. I understand the state needs the money. I'm just bringing up this as an issue. I'd just like to hear your comments on that.
Well, Phil, I guess that's kind of a philosophy argument, and we could, not argument, but debate, let me say, and we could get into that long term. But where I get some solace in that, even if I might fall on the more liberal side of that, is that we're not adding any new powers here. We're just making what they can always have been able to do under the law with a paper approach by subpoena to a bank, which would seize the same funds, do all of the very same things. We're just adding an electronic component, which is hopefully, based on, and we'll see with this pilot project, hopefully far less expensive, intrusive to the bank, which is in business, and they're accommodating the state when they have to answer these things at an expense of employment and so forth to them. And certainly should cut down a lot of the time that our taxpayers have to pay DOR to walk around physically and chase these things where we can do it electronically. I'm not aware in this bill that we've added a single power that's not already there. It's just coming into the 20th century. Many other states already do this, I think, or at least one does. We know of Maryland, I believe, 3 maybe is what it is. But that's I think the sign of the future is just. But again, the debate had to do with protection of privacies, and the circumstances are very unique in a situation. I certainly appreciate the gentleman's comments and questions, and sometimes I share those same concerns. I do.
Mr. Chairman, I had a question. Just wanted to, all the financial institutions have reviewed this, and they are comfortable with this language at this point.
I couldn't say all of them to give you an absolutely honest answer, but they've certainly been well represented by some very smart people that look after them. And this has not been a short debate. It has not. I'm confident that this has been well vetted through. I myself have talked to folks like the president of Bank of America, folks in the Synovus organization, and other banking organizations that I have a tremendous amount of respect for. And they all feel like it's worth a shot. I mean, they're all cautious because they're in a business that's very cautious. A little mistake in a $100 billion bank is a big mistake. We're cautiously optimistic that this is a far more efficient, less expensive, and frankly less intrusive manner of doing what's a pretty tough job that the Revenue Service has. And I think we're all in agreement, at least going forward. But totally voluntary on the bank's part. They do not have to even attempt it. They can take a wait-and-see attitude with a pilot project. To me, that's a responsible way of looking at an area that may be beneficial. And heck, if it's not, just won't do it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that answer. Seeing no further questions, that brings us to the time for a motion. All right, we're going to move to pass. Is there a second? All right, and just to make certain, this is LC 186262S, substitute to House Bill 353. All in favor of the passage, say aye. Aye. All opposed? And the bill carries unanimously. And we'll consider this meeting adjourned at this point.